Welcome to Fundraising Good Times. I'm Pearl Shaw, I'm the president of Saad&Shaw, and today our special guest is Dana Textoris, managing director of GrantsPlus. Welcome, Dana.
Hello, it's so good to be with you from a distance, but feel like we're together. So this is great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, well, this is wonderful. We're in different cities, different time zones, and yet we're together. For our listeners, I just want to share kind of funny connection. Dana and I actually know each other maybe 10, 12 years ago. We served on a board in the San Francisco Bay Area.
That's right. It feels like a whole lifetime ago.
Right. And it is so funny. I feel that that's one of those things that's kind of about the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector, that is full of people that we weave in and out of each other's lives. We take on different roles. But I think at the bottom of everything, there's really that commitment to serving the greater good. So I know I'm just glad to be reconnected with you. And
yes,
one of the things I want to talk about is grants. I mean, like your company now is GrantsPlus. So
right.
Why don't you just start talking with us a little bit about grants at this time in our unique history?
Absolutely. And, so GrantsPlus, we are focused entirely on helping nonprofits in the grant seeking process. And especially right now, it is such an important time to be attentive to grants and to relationships with grant makers. We were working with organizations through the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And I think one thing that we can all keep in perspective is that we got through that crisis. It was difficult. It was, it was painful in some ways, but we got through that crisis as a sector, and we're going to get through this crisis too. And as we've been counseling organizations right now about what they can be doing, we've been encouraging them to see that now is a very important time to keep focused on seeking grants.
Well, I like that. A lot of times this could be a time to pull your hair out and, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I know when we've talked, one of your big points, and it's something we stress too, is pick up the phone and talk to your funders.
Yes. Most important thing that we have been encouraging organizations to recognize is the importance of their relationships with their current grant makers. And it's so important. If you have not done it already, every organization leader should make sure they pick up the phone or send an email, maybe even more importantly right now, to connect with the foundations who have given a grant to your organization before. And here's why. One, they care about what's going on for you. And they don't know how the crisis is impacting the organization if you don't communicate that to them. So, reach out, explain how this crisis is impacting your programs and services, your clients, your staff. How is it maybe disrupting operations? Your funders care to know that. And they may even be able to give some flexibility. That's something we've seen a lot of, Pearl, is that funders want to be flexible. They want to help their grantees get to the other side of this crisis. And they've done that by sometimes relaxing reporting requirements right now, and some are even converting restricted grants that have already been made into unrestricted grants that can right now be used for emergency purposes. So yeah, so important to pick up the phone and connect with funders. I'm sure you're hearing that, Pearl, too, in your circles.
You're absolutely right. And it's interesting. Last week, Melvin and I had the opportunity to participate in a virtual conference. So it was the Association of Black Foundation Executives, and this was their annual conference. And we were supposed to meet in Raleigh, North Carolina, and clearly not happening. But they really scrambled, and it was exciting. They brought people together from around the country and the U.S. territories to talk about, obviously, philanthropy and its impact on Black communities, but also to talk about how to be responsive. And I think this is really a time when foundations, whether or not they're structured or, publicly, they identify themselves as, we are a responsive grant maker. It is a time where everybody is being responsive. And it was amazing to just hear, from foundation executives and program officers, how they were wanting to make themselves available to grantees. Like you said, just changing the parameters of existing grants, and then also welcoming phone calls, saying, oh, what do you need?
Yes.
What do you need? What will it take right now?
Yeah, that's right. And that's been really incredible to see how foundations have so quickly sprung to action to be responsive in their communities. Many hundreds of foundations, many community foundations in particular, have mounted these rapid response funds. So across the country, foundations, and sometimes in partnership with the local United Way and other local businesses, they have created a fund to be to make grants available to organizations, especially those on the front lines, who are switching gears in some cases to be reactive to the needs of communities. So we're seeing, we're seeing school programs. School might not be in session, but they are working with community organizations to make sure that kids have meals. Kids who were counting on getting their meals from schools can still count on getting those meals now. So in so many ways, organizations are reacting to what's happening. They're providing solutions, and funders want to support those efforts. So in these last weeks, billions of dollars have been granted to organizations through these rapid response funds, and that is another really important tip that I would leave with your listeners, that if you haven't already, talk to your local community foundation, look at what the larger foundations in your community are making available in terms of emergency grants. I was in conversation with a program officer at the Scranton Area Community Foundation in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a couple weeks ago, and she said, it's important to act quickly. Funders are being responsive, and they are mustering these resources together to disperse to organizations. In some cases, it is going to be the organizations that are fastest to speak up, to say we have these needs, to say we are addressing the challenges in the community. And so if you haven't already done that, move quickly to see what are the emergency grant opportunities in your area, and move quickly to act on them, because these programs, they're available now, and funders have switched gears, but it's important to be moving quickly to have those conversations.
I agree with you. I appreciate your stressing that, because I know sometimes there can be a reticence, or, do I have my case together? What's my story? What's my ask? Oh my gosh, they gave me a grant 2 years ago. I never filed my report. Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
I think that we will see that. I think we'll see foundations be, they're not expecting. I was talking with the Columbus Foundation, someone at the Columbus Foundation the other day. They aren't even necessarily requesting outcomes, that you can, what they want to hear is, what are you seeing in the community? How is your organization moving to react to it? Of course, as much as you can, use detail, use story, use what we know to be the important aspects of good grant writing, because you still need to tell your story, but don't wait to have a perfect plan in place before you take steps to share with your funders what you're doing and what you need.
I really appreciate that advice, and I think also one of the things we're hearing is you don't have to have a relationship with current foundations or a current relationship with a specific foundation in order to approach them. And that sometimes, there's a feeling that there's gatekeepers within foundations, and there's a lot of protocols and things that you need to follow, and it's a dance, and that's very important. But right now, foundations, and as you said, partnerships, collaborations between business and foundations, people are looking for a way to get money and resources to people and organizations on the ground, the closest to the ground. But I want to also say this was something that was talked about last week too with the APFI conference is, you know, the need today is so great, and, you know, emergency funds, like you said, they're being set up, you know, all over the place, and that's so important. And at the same time, there's that parallel track about taking the time to think about what are going to be the needs post-coronavirus.
Right. Absolutely.
Which communities are being impacted in different ways? What's the specificity for a nonprofit about the people you serve or how you serve that you need to think about for the future, and to start talking to people about what you're seeing, what you're projecting, what you're anticipating, and what you'll need, because foundations also do think long term. I think you've talked about this in the past. Well, foundations, and the people within the foundations have priorities, which they will return to, but everything will be different. You know, everything will be different.
And we don't have a crystal ball to see exactly how things will change, but we have to do both these things. We have to have the now in mind. What are the needs that we have right now? What are the challenges that we are responding to right now? And we have to have, in that other hand, and then what comes next. And I think what we'll see is there are some organizations who might face really big questions about how does this crisis in the immediate term, and perhaps even the short future term, how does it impact our mission? How does it impact who we're serving? And foundations might be facing some of these same questions. I think you're right, Pearl. I think an arts foundation that has cared about the arts yesterday and today, we can probably count on them to continue caring about the arts tomorrow. And so, you know, we do expect that foundations are not likely to completely, you know, change their priorities and their mission. However, we are all going to be reacting in real time to the needs. And so you also don't want to take for granted that a funder you had yesterday will still be a funder tomorrow. And so it's important to, as you're continuing to contact your current funders, steward those relationships with care, to also be thinking about how do you continue building a pipeline of new potential grant prospects. In any year, it's important to be thinking about, you know, some funders may shift priorities. They may move on to fund other organizations. What is your plan to replace that grant if you lose it with other funding? And so now is a really good time to be looking at who are, you know, funders who've been on your radar that you can investigate a bit more closely. Are you stepping into some new directions, maybe because of the crisis? And what new funding opportunities might open up to you if you are to pursue new, you know, programmatic or service areas? So spending some time now to evaluate potential funders and think about how you might approach them in the near future term, that will set you up, your organization up, to be closer to the front of the line when things do return to some sort of normal. And because let's also keep in mind that right now, funders are pretty focused. Many funders are pretty focused on funding the crisis. And so, you know, might not be the best time to reach out to a funder you've never talked to before. But be prepared to take steps to communicate with them and start building a relationship in the coming weeks and months.
And I really appreciate the way that you've balanced the need to act in the now, to take specific actions now, but also to simultaneously be planning for what does the future look like, and realistic. I felt you were very realistic there that, you know, some foundations will shift priorities, or they might stay with their priorities, but feel they need to change who within their sector they're going to fund. And that's always part of fundraising and grant writing, is making sure, we always say, have 3 times the qualified prospects that you need for your budget, because you don't know. I mean, in a time of not knowing,
that's right,
we don't know.
No, that's right. And that's why it's important to have really all of your options available, really be thinking of all of the routes to new potential funding. One thing I think that is important to include in our conversation today is how federal agencies are also making emergency grants available. So the CARES Act, it allocated hundreds of billions of dollars to federal funding agencies for the purposes of making that funding available to nonprofits in the form of emergency grants. And we are seeing already federal agencies open new funding programs. So the NEA, for example, the National Endowment for the Arts, has released a new grant opportunity that is specifically intended to help organizations replace lost income, to pay salaries. And so this is an example of one of these emergency grant opportunities. They're only giving about a 4-week window for organizations to complete their application. So what's going to be very important as we see these federal emergency grant opportunities be released, organizations will need to be ready to take action and to apply because the time frames will be fast. Deadlines will be tight, and so there are steps that organizations can take right now to be ready to pursue those federal opportunities when they open.
Well, that's great advice. I agree with everything you've said, and I like it that you've talked a little bit about the CARES Act and the role of granting agencies, and I think that, well, I do know we'll see that on the local level as well. What are local governments, county governments doing to make funds available? And I'd go back to what you said in the beginning, which is talking to people, telling them what's going on.
Even, there's sometimes this idea that when it comes to federal grants, that you really can't talk to somebody at that federal funding agency, and that's not the case. If you have received a federal grant in the past, now is actually a really good time to reach out to that staff member at the federal funding agency. In the same way you are with your foundation funders, share with them how the crisis is impacting you. Talk to them now if you see that there may be impact on an active federal grant that you are currently managing, and whether any changes will be made. And also, it's fine to have a conversation with them right now about what is coming, about an emergency federal grant that they may be preparing to launch. Imagine these federal grant reviewers are going to be inundated with requests from organizations seeking this federal funding. And so use that human connection that you have to refresh this staff member's memory of how vital your organization has been. It will only help you to do that.
Great. Dana, this is just really great suggestions that you have, and I've appreciated the opportunity for us to talk about it. I feel that the things we've covered is some of the fundamentals of proposal writing and relationships with foundations and, as you said, government agencies who fund. I just appreciate it, and I think at this time nonprofits have an increased importance, because sometimes we don't remember that a foundation and a federal agency, they make manifest their vision through funding nonprofits who are the ones who actually carry out the work. So it's not just like to change your headset. If you're a nonprofit, you're like, no, you are needed.
Yeah, you aren't begging for funds. You are making it possible, like you said, Pearl, for these agencies and these foundations to see their mission come alive in the world. So that is a very important charge that organizations have, and really to see their relationships with funders as a partnership. So important. And I think you're right that what we've covered today, these are the fundamentals of good grant seeking. It's not that the fundamentals don't change. What changes is our context.
Right.
And in this moment of crisis, that context is that, we expect that grants, they may become more competitive as a result of this crisis. The economic conditions, the stock market, that may have some impact on the funds that many foundations have available to grant. So there's going to be, perhaps contracting resources. There will also perhaps be more organizations seeking help. So, one thing that we know is, even as grants become more competitive, your relationships with foundations and funders become even more precious. So, one fundamental is lean into those relationships, have communication. If you haven't already, be addressing what you can right now in terms of gaining emergency funds, and be thinking to the future. Plant those seeds today so that you are able to cultivate and grow a garden of grant funding in the future.
Dana, this is excellent. I want to say thank you. And for our listeners, we have information associated with this video that how you can reach Dana. Again, she's the managing director with GrantsPlus. They have a lot of resources on their website. Clearly, their whole business is about working with nonprofits, and in a way it's outsourcing that expertise. They provide the expertise to help you articulate your mission, your vision, and put together your proposal in a way that it can be easily processed and understood by foundation or granting agency. I just want to say that because I know sometimes people are listening and they're like, but I don't have time to write a grant, or, we're kind of already on this track. But I just wanted to call out your resources. And then I know we've got a column that we interviewed Dana, not only for this video, but for our Fundraising Good Times column. And she made available some tips, things for people to consider. We'll put a link for that with this video. And we just want to say thank you. And Dana, any closing words?
I want to thank you, Pearl, and thank your listeners for joining us. I do invite anyone to reach out to me if I or GrantsPlus may be a resource to you. We have a lot of free resources on our website right now about grant seeking in crisis. So I wish you the very best successes in your very important work, and hope that this will only be the beginning of our conversation.
Great. Thank you all. And as always, hope you'll have a fundraising good time.
Mm-hmm.